Yep.
Back to zero.
I had to move a light. I had to move a light.
Oh my God. I love you.
Isn't that better? Okay.
Oh, you look great.
That's a little bit better, isn't it? Yeah, 50 years of experience.
Got it, man. I can see it.
Move that red head over there. Bring the inky closer. Okay.
Legendary B movie Ozploitation filmmaker himself, Brian Trenchard-Smith. Brian, thanks for being on with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, you wrote a pretty great book, Adventures in the B Movie Trade. I've read it. I thought it's fantastic. I had to bring you on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I really wanted to dive into what makes a great B movie, because I think it's such a tricky genre to work in. You can have some filmmakers will make a movie purposely bad, thinking they're going to hit the genre and it's going to be a big hit, and it doesn't work. You'll have other filmmakers that will make a film very seriously with the best intent and it just doesn't come out right, and then it's a big cult hit. But that's not the approach you took. You dove into this genre to almost work through, I would say, an absurdist kind of parody as far as some of the sequels for like the old Leprechaun movies would go, but you always had a bit of humor that comes into your films. And I was wondering if you feel that is kind of a key component to working in this type of genre.
Yeah, I mean, like the Donald O'Connor song, make him laugh, make him laugh, make him laugh. I mean, and a great sequence, if you remember that movie. But yeah, I've always, you know, perhaps because a primary influence on my life was initially the Goon Show on radio, and then, you know, the various BBC radio shows like Round the Horn and Beyond Our Ken, and then, you know, and those writers like Barry Took and Marty Feldman went on to, you know, other satirical shows. So I kind of grew up on satirical British humor, and it stayed with me all my life. So I would say that my films, you know, both celebrate and satirize the genre tropes that are their foundation stones, and I try to sort of push, you know, the envelope of absurdity just a little bit here and there, and then in case of Leprechaun in Space, sort of, you know, go wildly, you know, out into space with it. But my films tend to be a little on the sort of slightly overripe stage, and I suppose it's, you might call some of these films cheesy, but, you know, some cheese is really rather delicious. And I try to make a ripe camembert from time to time.
I have to admit, I love those films. So, you know, I grew up going to the video store every weekend, and I'd go and I'd rent 3 or 4 films, and I ended up renting, you know, pretty much all of Blockbuster at one point. And so when like a Leprechaun 3 or 4 would come out, I would rent them. I'd rent them alongside any, you know, big drama hits that would come out. And those films, whether they're, you know, I wouldn't say cheesy or maybe camp, but they're enjoyable. I still remember them to this day, and think back on them fondly, because they are what they are. They are fun, and I don't see any issue with trying to make a film that is fun while bringing in an almost Monty Python type of satire, which I think is an essential part of filming. And if that is the formula that you've used over your long career, I mean, obviously it's worked.
Well, I have a slight sort of meta tendency, I guess. I am, you know, both enjoying the genre tropes. I'm commenting upon them a little bit by pushing the envelope of absurdity just a touch or a great deal, depending upon, so that the viewer can enjoy the film much as I enjoy a film. When I watch a film, I want to step into the screen and join the participants, both in the story.
Right.
And I think everyone who watches drama does that. You identify with one of the central characters, and you imagine yourself undergoing the trials and obstacles.
Kind of becoming immersed in the
so
the
you
film.
become immersed in the
Yeah.
story, but at the same time, I would step into the screen and want to become immersed in the making of the story. To me, maybe it's a sort of strangely schizoid mind that I have. And I can simultaneously enjoy a really good story, a serious film, where you're being told that you're watching a true story, you're watching reality, or a heightened reality at least. But then I can still enjoy the mechanics of how it is made and how the mood is created. When the music is affecting my enjoyment of a scene, part of my mind is saying, I really enjoy that music, and that music is working because the combination of the violins and this, that, is working on my emotions, and that's good. And whereas sometimes the music, no, that's not a good piece of music.
Right.
It's part of. I'll tune it out slightly, but I'm filing it.
So you find yourself filmmaking and kind of critiquing other films as you're watching them.
Yes, and you'd think that would spoil my enjoyment, and maybe it would spoil other people's enjoyment. But I can, completely have both my brains working on the film at the same time.
Well, I think that's interesting. I have the same issue with screenwriting. So if I'm watching a film, I'm automatically, breaking down all the beats. And in fact, when I first got into screenwriting, my wife warned me. She said, I know how much you love movies, and if you start doing this, you're going to ruin movies for yourself, because you won't stop analyzing them, because I know how you are. And she was pretty much right. But I can tell you this: if I watch a film and I'm not analyzing it, that's a hell of a film, because it's drawn me in.
Yes. Yeah. I find that there'll always be a tiny percentage of my consciousness, and certainly my subconscious, that is analyzing the film. But it doesn't, but I can still admire it enormously and enjoy where it has transported me to.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned how you like to bring a bit of humor and comedy to your films. And I can tell you, by reading your autobiography, Adventures in the B Movie Trade, you have a very sharp wit, sir. Absolutely hilarious. I don't tend to read a book and laugh out loud, except that I was cracking up for a good section of your book, because you are able to present situations of your life in such an honest yet hysterical way.
Well, life is is engagingly absurd, I think, and the only way to look at it, you either got to laugh or cut your throat.
That's a good point.
I think, look, I'm fortunate. I've had a very lucky, privileged life, and I somehow got into, I got into the profession that I wanted to be in from the age of 13, and lucked out, and by 20 I was in full-time work, and have never looked back. Now, of course, my age has required me to be put out to pasture. So, I still think I have stud value, and I could certainly create some more interesting beasts if I was put to work. But when you get close to 75, people think you might fall apart any moment, and you know, I'm still, well, until COVID, I was still fencing competitive épée.
Oh, you're a fencer. You know, my son is a fencer.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah, yeah, that's his main sport that he does. He does saber.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's a little bit more of an aggressive type, right? The saber guys are aggressive.
I'm very aggressive. I'm a very aggressive épée fencer. I attack, but
Yeah,
a lot of my attacks are feints to draw you out.
yeah,
But and I have height and I have length of arm. I
yeah.
use too much upper body strength, not enough with the fingers. But God damn it, it's good when you get that point
Yeah.
of the blade and the blade bends on your opponent's chest. That is
awesome.
nice. So I came 9th in the US Nationals for the over 70s in a thin year. 29 people. I came 9th out of 29, and I was 72. And so
well,
yeah.
congratulations. Well, that's absolutely amazing. So
Yeah.
one of my favorite stories from your book, your autobiography, because we like to do a little bit of an origin story on this show, is where you got your first big break with EJ Fancy. And I thought it was absolutely hysterical. The way you described this man is he sounds rather shady, I would say is the appropriate term.
It was a bit shady, yeah, a bit shady.
Yeah, stabbed a guy in the leg.
This is before Minder, but when Minder came along, I thought, that reminds me of EJ Fancy.
Yeah. So he had stabbed a guy. The guy lost his leg, and then when they went to
him in the groin.
Jesus.
Nice, you know. Okay, you made your point.
This is somebody that worked for him, right?
Yes, his accountant, who was not happy with the way the books were being cooked at the request of his boss.
And you ended up working there as an editor, right?
Well, as someone sweeping the cutting room floor, basically. They just needed somebody for, I think it was £7.50 a week.
Wow.
This is 1964, fine. I'd edited some 8mm film, and I'd graduated to some 16mm raw footage that my then girlfriend's father, who was at the Central Electricity Generating Board, had shot of a better process for bringing pylons onto a farmer's land by helicopter rather than trekking it over his field and getting damage for, getting compensation for the damage. So I was to put all this footage into some kind of order, which I did. And he paid me £5. It was very nice of him. And then I could say I could edit 16mm film.
Right. Of course.
But I made a plausible case as a sort of 18-year-old saying, I want to get in the business and I'll do anything. And so he took me on, and I started the next week. And mainly, a lot of things I had to do was to take out censor cuts from various films.
To make like a rating so that the film can be released.
In those days, the U certificate. I'm going back into the Stone Age here, and I don't know whether any of your listeners are sort of familiar with what British censorship was like in the 50s and 60s.
Well, it was very conservative.
Very conservative.
Yeah.
But they were, there were still restrictions on nudity, and certainly any nudity involved in a sexual situation. They were allowed to, you could import these nature films, things like Naked as Nature Intended, where people were sort of playing, nudists in the nudist colony were playing badminton with carefully positioned.
And they called that a nature film?
Yes.
And they would release it theatrically?
Yes, because it was new. That's
crazy.
The strange thing was you could show women's breasts on the British cinema screen, provided they were native breasts, or they were engaging in the legal natural pursuit of naturism, which is to walk around in the somewhat chilly British summer.
My goodness.
Wearing nothing at all. And the camera would always find a discreetly placed potted palm that would obscure the nasty bits.
So
could
you were
see
brought in
in long view, let's say, and
yeah, and you were brought in to edit that so that they could have theatrical releases.
yeah.
And then EJ Fancy would just have you put it all back in anyway after.
Well, yeah, I mean yeah, I mean I remember a film called Scorching Sands, which was originally made under the title of Scheherazade, and it was part of the Scheherazade story. Gerard Barret and Anna Karina, a big French production dubbed into English, 170mm print for West End and a bunch of 35mm prints. The British censor said the whipping scene where Gerard takes the lash instead of Anna, reduce the 12 lashes to 3. So I duly reduced the 12 lashes to 3, though I think 1 or 2 more lashes sounded over, but it's the on-screen lashes that were the problem.
Right.
And then having done that, the print was then submitted to the BBFC. It said, okay, thank you, you've done the cuts, good. It's now got a U certificate for general exhibition. And it would come back and say, okay, now put them back in.
And that's what you would send to theaters, the uncut version.
Well, good. I mean, frankly, I kind of enjoyed the whipping scene, with all 12 lashes. It was, you really sensed the man's pain and the sacrifice that he was making to prevent this woman being, horribly whipped. And he was a big, tough crusader, and he could take it. And there was a good reason for 12 lashes, well, certainly 12 on camera. Anyway, so I as a young boy who liked movies that pushed the envelope, I kind of applauded that.
And how old were you?
18.
18. So at 18, I mean, eventually you left there, right? When did you start your own production company? How old were you?
Goodness, I was 26, just going
26 with your own production company.
Well, you got to get started sometime.
That's amazing. It's impressive. And so where did that lead into the Ozploitation, going to Australia to take advantage of the film credits that you could have there? I'm sorry, to take advantage of the film incentives, the tax incentives.
There were no incentives when I went there. I went there at 19, I turned 20 on the ship to Australia. And by a series of great coincidences, I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I happened to just barge into a TV station and say, hey, I want to meet the personnel manager because I've just come from England. I've got this reference of my abilities as in film editing, which I had written myself. It was a forged reference. And I'd written it I'd done some work as a clapper boy for a small company, non-union company. And when I left, I took a sheet of their letterhead. I typed this this reference of myself saying that I could do anything. Then I took it to the boss and I said, I'm going to Australia. Would you mind signing this? Because it'll help me get started down there.
Did he read it or did he just sign it?
He read it and he signed it.
Oh, then
he liked me. He liked me. I was a brash kid. Nothing has changed. But
I think that's something that right now you need to be a filmmaker. Is you need that almost hubris to get out there and forge your path. I mean, at 26, you created your own production company. It's amazing.
I think hubris is my middle name. Well, and sometimes that's brought me undone. But I've navigated the reefs somehow, but you have to have chutzpah. You have to put yourself out there and say you have to get to the front of the queue as much as you can. So I blundered in, and as lo and behold, they actually did. So, oh, well, wait a moment, and I was ushered into this guy's office, and the story is told in the book, but he had a traumatic experience recently by being held up at gunpoint.
Wow.
in the very same office that I was visiting him,
Wow.
when they robbed the payroll there. And none of this I knew when I saw him, but it just so happened there was an opening for an afternoon newsreader. I was auditioned for that, but I had my plummy British accent was not really what they wanted on Australian afternoon news at Channel 10.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they just lost someone from the news editing department, and I said, well, I can do that. So they said, okay, we'll give you a go. And within the first week, due to obviously, people wanting me to, to succeed, I quickly learned exactly what to do in terms of cutting news. And
Right.
there's an art to it. And if you can cut news, you can pretty much cut anything.
So that led into, eventually you've got your own production company and you're creating films. Now, where
well, I had to take a detour. The news film editing, I being a brash kid, I said, I think your promos are dull. Could I make some that are more interesting? Let's say concentrating on the sex and violence, which is, after all, what everyone watches television for.
Okay.
Well, not in those days, very little of it. But so I made some promos that were quite successful, and then a rival network, stole me, and I made promos for them that were even more successful, and they won the ratings that year.
Okay.
And they gave me a reel of I said, I'm going around the world to further my education. They gave me a reel of my stuff to show people. And when I showed my promos in America to an American company, they said, oh, well, would you like to make trailers for us in London?
Okay.
So I came to London and made trailers for National Screen Service, a bunch of Hammer horror trailers. Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West, that you can find that one on YouTube. It's still going today, my original trailer.
That's cool.
Anyway, so that was a lateral move into production, into distribution, and on the theatrical level, where I gained a great understanding of how things worked, and then the relationship between distribution and exhibition. This was before home video. But the Australians said, come back and work for us and make more promos for us. And I said, okay, I will, if you give me programs to make. So I was promo director and special projects producer. And after 2 years of making variety shows and a variety of things,
Gotcha.
Dramatized documentaries, that's how I made I slipped into the production stream. I was self-taught, and naturally.
Amazing. No film school experience.
No. I mean, I don't know whether people would agree with me, but I think high-priced film schools are, a bit of a economic risk, really. We don't put yourself in debt, because you can learn all you need to learn very quickly in a couple of weeks. Yeah. Well, I mean, you need to study theory. You do need to read about films. You need to immerse yourselves in films and see films and evaluate them and draw your own conclusions and see why this worked, or that would look slow, but that looked convincing, etc., etc. Anyway, so it's been a lifelong education, and I don't think I'm finished learning yet. But
I love that. I love that you have the mentality of a forever student, because that's definitely something I am beginning to notice with a lot of my guests who come on that have that mentality, have hit incredible successes because they don't let the ego get in the way, and they're constantly searching.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a strong ego to drive you forward, but if you're smart, you surround yourself with people who can make your work better, and you don't resist them when
exactly
if you trust their their skills and their intellect, then listen to them and make modifications based upon good advice.
Take the note. Yeah. So what your career led into, obviously, the B movie thing, and we've talked about, humor is a great way to bring that B movie into a more more appealing type of film. But with the B movie thing, did you find yourself searching these out? Did the opportunities just appear to you? Did it start with budget issues? I mean, where did you kind of?
Well, luckily, I was able to self-generate initially. When I went independent, I immediately made what I believe would be a calling card for myself. And I knew what I did well, I could do well. I just had a natural instinct for the dynamics of screen action. You know, where to put the camera when somebody falls over.
Yeah.
You know, close to where he lands. You know, fairly basic things like that. And the camera movement generates screen energy. So keep things moving.
Keep things moving, yeah.
And generate enough coverage so that you can create even greater pace by cutting back and forth and so forth. So I knew that was the best way to show my skills, because I always believed that the film business was an international market. It wasn't just, wasn't just going to be making Australian films, because you know they were only just beginning to be made at that time. So I always believed the international market was important, and action was the universal currency of the international market. It transcended all language barriers. So I made The Stuntmen, which was about stuntmen. And I created 4 fake movie sequences: a commando raid with the rope slides and explosions, a motorbike commercial with crashes, a Western shootout with horse falls, and saddle falls, stirrup drags, etc., and a car chase that ended in a fiery conclusion with full body burns.
Wow.
Which we pioneered without a fire suit, and we did it with a fire retardant gel.
That's cool.
And you know, I tried out the gel myself. I set my naked arm on, which I included in the film because I very rapidly put it out.
It had to be painful, right?
No. The gel worked.
Okay.
But just the sensation of heat initially takes you by surprise. But you know, it's a funny moment in the film, because I'm thinking I'm going to be able to hold this for 5 seconds. No, I bloody well can't. Stuck it in the bucket, and then I did it again so we could get a closer shot. So. But I've done 5 fire stunts, and
wow.
I gave them up shortly after I got married. I thought, well, I will hang up my water gel.
I don't think you see a lot of directors out there setting themselves on fire.
Well, it was generally done as a publicity stunt. The hottest director in town. I was offered to the Johnny Carson show way back in 1975 when we were promoting The Man from Hong Kong, and there was initial response from. But legal affairs said absolutely not.
Right.
The curtains would have drawn. Carson would have said, "I want you to meet the hottest director in town." The curtains would have drawn, and there I would be on fire.
So you said in your book, you said that you've had a long career, but you've never hit the biggest heights. And I would have to slightly disagree with that, just because you've done things like A Man from Hong Kong, which had a good following, and you did Turkey Shoot here in the U.S. It's called Escape 2000. I've seen it, and when Quentin Tarantino walks up to you and quotes a line from your movie, which is let's see, I think I can't just say it from memory. Freedom is obedience. Obedience is work. Work is life. So I think if Tarantino walks up to you and quotes your movie and then dedicates one of his films to you, I think you've made it. I think you've hit some pretty highs.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to Quentin for for lifting me up and saying because he really loves film and loves filmmakers, and knows that 99% of really good filmmakers are largely unknown.
Yeah.
and there he was working in a video store in South Beach in California, and he would see all these Australian films that would come in just direct to VHS in the US, and he'd think, wow, these are interesting, these got a different flavor, this is not cookie cutter stuff.
Yeah.
So he very kindly, he gives the nod to a number of other Australian filmmakers. But at the Sydney premiere of Kill Bill Volume 1, he said, and all the local glitterati of the Australian film industry were there at that premiere, and he said, well, I'm going to dedicate this film to one of my favorite films, favorite Australian films. And you could wonder what ripple of interest in the audience. Is it mine? Is it mine? Is it mine?
Right.
And I dedicate it to Turkey Shoot. And there was a visible murmur of from the glitterati. And he then went on to say, well, if you don't like Brian Trenchard-Smith's films, you're not going to like this film, so you can fuck off right now.
That's fantastic and validating. I mean, I've watched Turkey Shoot, and I thought it was a really interesting Orwellian type of B movie, and there's a scene where a guy gets this man beast gets rammed by a bulldozer and split in half. Yes. And I was reading about it in the book, and I start laughing immediately. And my wife goes, "Why are you laughing?" And I say, "Well, it says here that in the special effects, they stuffed his pants full of lunch meat."
Well, we had leftover lunch meat and plenty of tomato ketchup, and we were a low budget production, so
it works.
Yeah,
it works.
The traveling pants were filled with with what was available, and
oh man,
and we jerked the bottom half of his trousers with piano wire. Obviously a wildly absurd moment. Again, there's a push. You could have played that scene for sort of really nasty, sadistic detail. The slow crunching of the bulldozer blade through the body, the howls of pain, etc. You're going to play it in that kind of, let's say, quasi torture porn of intensity, and I some of those sequences can be really effective, but I was operating on a level of black humor.
And it came off. It matched the tone of the film.
So. So when he gets cut in half by the bulldozer, what does his owner say? Oh shit! Yes, I mean, so I would say that under the circumstances.
And then doesn't miss a beat and picks up a rocket launcher. So it's
that's the way these things should be done.
So, no, I think it works.
So I just take it and push it just a little bit further, but I don't go so far as to do a direct wink at the screen.
Yeah, so that's what I want to ask you. I mean, taste-wise, how do you not push it too far, where it's like, okay, now this is just silly, and lose the audience? I mean, it's got to be a fine line there.
Yes, and you could say that for some people, I pushed it too far in Leprechaun in Space. I was playing with a horror genre that, frankly, wasn't particularly horrific. So when I came on board with Leprechaun in Vegas, I went much more directly for comedy.
You did, yeah. With the I love Leprechaun in Vegas. I'm not ashamed to say it's a funny film.
It's actually quite a good comedy.
It is. There are scares in it, and I like the fact that you gave the Leprechaun like limericks where he would rhyme. You wrote those?
I mean,
awesome.
I think the young man of Madras whose balls were both made of fine brass, that one I think is a traditional one. But I wrote all the Leprechaun rhyming dialogue and limericks. Yeah.
and it
Play
adds.
me this trick, I will chop off your comes down the axe, obscuring the last word as the axe lands just between his legs. And
Yeah,
again,
it was
an
perfect.
example of my flair for subtlety. But
well, you infused life into a franchise that I think had the potential to die. Is I really do.
Yeah, it was intended to die after the third one. It was be a trilogy. Okay, we'll get the three of them out on VHS.
Right.
But then the Leprechaun in Vegas, sold vastly more copies than Leprechaun 2, which I think in conceived as Bride of Leprechaun, but didn't quite. It was neither scary nor funny.
Yeah. Yeah. It was. Yeah.
Yeah. But and Warwick said to me, they just kept me in the shadows a lot. And I had put all this makeup on. It's 3.5 hours to put the Leprechaun makeup on and 40 minutes to take it off. And that's that's quite an ordeal every day for 18 days.
I mean, he's a great actor, and
he's a great actor.
And seeing him in that part, I mean, I think of like he's relishing it, just like Freddy Krueger, the actor there, he's really relishing it, and you can see Warwick is relishing this part, which adds to the terror, really, of this monster. And so. And with Leprechaun in Space, I like this film. It's funny, and there are some scares. Special effects are pretty good, and but everything was going in space. Jason ended up in space. There was a Hellraiser in space.
Let's go there. Join the club.
It was very much like, what was that? Late 90s, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there wasn't Jason in Space. Was it? I think it was earlier.
Okay. But everybody was going there.
I shot it in 94.
Okay.
Going into 95. Yeah.
All right. So you might have launched the in space thing.
No, it was already in. I think so. It already been some. Jason might have been in space. Maybe Hellraiser came later. I don't know. I think I might have killed people. The franchise. It killed the idea of sending demonic serial killers to space. And that was probably secretly part of my intention. I mean, let's take this. This is the most absurd thing to do with a scary guy, is suddenly transport him to a different time, and that's part of the problem with Leprechaun in Space, is that it blends two genres.
Right. That could be tough.
Once you take, you see, at least in Vegas, you're living in theoretically the real world that the Leprechaun invades.
Right.
When you go to space, you're living in a fantasy world that we've all invented, and we are now inventing it on a low budget for $1.5 million, and so we can only go so far. I think we did very well for $1.5 million.
Oh yeah.
And that's due to the prosthetics makeup guy, Gabe Bartolis, who does the Leprechaun makeup and did the wonderful, mitten spider fusion of spider and fly. And
that couldn't have been cheap. And then you did, but you did some old tricks too. You had like forced perspective and stuff like that to make him look like he was really tall, which I thought was cool. But obviously it didn't kill the franchise, because they went with Leprechaun in the Hood and stuff like that. So it was obviously kept going. But I was into it. I think a lot of people have seen your films, but they just don't realize that they've seen your films.
Yeah, I actually had an email from somebody who just bought the book saying, I had no idea you made all these films that I actually saw on television. I always remember your early Australian films and thought, well, okay, that's what you did. But you went on and made all these other films in America, and just sort of meat and potatoes films that I quite enjoyed. I've made some straight films as well. Sahara, my remake of the 1943 Humphrey Bogart war movie.
Okay.
Jim Belushi in that role, is a film I'm proud of, shot in 18 days. and is whereas the original was shot in 25 days.
Wow.
But you know, well, look, but it was a very respectful remake that people who loved the first one, you know, actually think, you know, they could have trashed our favorite movie, but they didn't. It's like someone did a YouTube, you know, shot or scene by scene comparison of my film with the Zoltan Korda version of Sahara, and it's on YouTube if anyone wants to look at it. But it's quite an intelligent analysis and critique of the remake. And originally the man set about doing this critique. He was going to look at mine and tear it to shreds, but he didn't want to when he saw it. But so I can be straight, but I tend, there is a, you know, humor should always spring naturally from character and situation in the film, not be shoehorned in. If there's a flaw of, you know, of Leprechaun in space, I'm obviously reaching for parody wherever I can of various sci-fi movie tropes, which in a way gets in the way of the story, you could say.
Right. I would say Leprechaun 4 feels more like a Aliens parody.
It's a pastiche of Aliens with a little bit of Land of the Giants. And you know, when we finally dispose of the Leprechaun, who's, you know, when we finally dispose of the
the hand scene.
Well, you know, we freeze the mitten spider because we're thinking of the Fly, of course, and when we blow him up before he blows it, we have to say, "Help me!" For those. So there are these little references which 99.9% of the audience don't get, but cinema nerds and sci-fi nerds do.
Well, there you go. That's why I loved it.
But you have to be careful that the tail does not wag the dog. And
that's great advice.
Those that compare Leprechaun 3 and Leprechaun 4 feel that my tail was a little too, you know, wagged the dog a little bit too much.
Got a little bit away from you.
But I thought, what the hell? This is, you know, these kind of endless horror sequels are, you know, they ended up in a sort of reductio ad absurdum situation. And so let's make this as absurd as we possibly can.
Well, you know, the other thing is you don't want to go too serious. I mean, look at the subject matter for what it is, because they did a remake of the Leprechaun and they went real serious. They went real dark and it went nowhere. Nobody wanted to watch it.
No, that's not what they want to watch Leprechaun for. I would have thought 5 previous Leprechaun movies would have taught them that. But there was some bright spark at Lionsgate that said, "Oh no, we got to go.
We got to go real dark and gritty." And they tried, and it failed. And they attempted the same thing with Nightmare on Elm Street. They recasted Robert Englund, put somebody else in there, Jackie Earle Haley, who is an incredibly talented actor, but they went real dark. They took away a bit of the humor, a bit of the lightness in it. And again, nobody liked it. Everybody said, "This is not my Friday the 13th. I'm so sorry. This is not my Nightmare on Elm Street." And so nobody went to see it. So I think, again, with Leprechaun being what it is, and I did not intend for this episode to be about Leprechaun, so I apologize about that.
That's all right.
But you have to know what it is in order to appropriately create a film on it. So what kind of advice do you have for screenwriters, for filmmakers that are looking to get into filmmaking, that are the young 18 to 26-year-old who are trying to break out in today's environment?
Well, it is a lot harder today than it was in my young day. It is much more corporatized now, and therefore, you know, the number of avenues you can pursue shrink at the number of gates that you then have to force your way through. You know, just even to get into the maze and then find, you know, the gates to, you know, let's say higher levels it's a lot harder. I suppose there's one overarching recommendation I would make to people is make friends. I mean, it's a
Okay.
good rule of
Network.
life, actually. Network, and no, don't just network on a totally exploitative way. Just, you know, I'm looking for people who'll do things for me. If you do things for other people and get involved and help other people with their projects, I've always found that work breeds work. So, I mean, you can, you know, rapidly ascend in the business if you have written a script that a star wants to be in. Now, the star's representatives will immediately try and boot you out of the director's chair and replace you with a more reliable and seasoned and director who loves your script or will then change it completely. But anyway, for some reason they want to make your script and the star wants to be in your script. But if you can somehow survive the politics and remain as the director, and make a good film, then you are definitely on your way. But that's kind of like a one and, you know, a bolt of lightning shot. But I could give an example of Sylvester Stallone, who wrote the original script for Rocky, and they all said, "Wow, this is a great script, Sly. Oh, we love this. We will give you $350,000 to walk away." Because, you know, we've got big stars who'd want to play this role, and we've got big, you know, directors. And nope. And he eventually accepted 20,000 for the script and scale for the role, but retained his rights. And you know, that built, you know, Stallone, you know, that kicked Stallone's career off.
Right.
And enabled him to, you know, be a significant force. And, you know, he learned to direct films as a result of working with some really good directors, and, you know, has done some quite good stuff in a particular genre. Though, you know, I think the last Rambo was kind of tired and mechanical, but I think someone else did that. Anyway, but this was an example of that, one of those Hail Marys where he just stuck to his guns, and instead of just the project just getting pushed aside, forget it, this is too hard. Let's get someone else to write something.
There's an even more recent example of that with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon with Good Will Hunting.
Good Will Hunting, exactly.
You know, and they even did it. They got such heat on that script, Brian, that they put in a love scene between Matt Damon's character and Robin Williams' character, and slid it into the script because nobody was reading the script, but the script got so much heat that people were just trying to buy the script and know they wanted to be more involved with it. So one of the executives read the script and said, "I really like the script, but I don't understand this love scene." And they said, "Okay, so we'll go with this guy because he actually read it," which I thought was a really funny thing.
Oh, really? This is something I didn't know. Oh,
yeah.
Excellent. Well, all power to them. Yeah, I mean, Affleck is a really good director, actually. I think when you look at his crime movies, he has his Boston movies anyway. Well, because I think he understands the milieu. He grew up in it, and I think, you know, directing from truth that is personal to you is very helpful. I don't know why war and mayhem is personal to me, but I have a flair for it.
Well, I mean, I think with writing comes the same way. When you're writing something, if you're writing from truth, it is seen in the work, and I think that it takes that work to the next level.
Yeah.
So Adventures in the B Movie Trade is pretty great. It's available. I'm going to put it on our website on The Successful Screenwriter. I'll make sure that there's a link for the book as well in the description of this podcast.
Yeah.
And, well, I know you've retired. Is there anything else that you have going on?
Well, I won't say I hate being retired. I mean, I think we evolve throughout our lives. I'll be 75 soon. I feel 75 years young, not 75 years old. But I decided that I didn't want, when I knew that, frankly, that the phone wasn't going to ring very often. And it may still. I mean, there are some, as a director, you depend upon producers with influence having the money or being able to raise the money for you for projects and offering them to you, or managing to sell a project that you've created. And I have created a wonderful Euro crime potential miniseries, but it could be a movie called Blowback, which producer is trying to find money for. But with COVID and the
right
evolution of theatrical onto streamer as a change in the fundamental business practices now that are going on. It's a very confused world, and only people with real clout get past the gatekeepers and get their projects evaluated. So I decided 5 years ago that I didn't want to just stay in a nice house in Los Angeles and go to BAFTA screenings and meet a whole bunch and associate with lots of people of a similar age who are all gradually fading out of the business. And I didn't want to be just sharing old war stories the whole time. I thought, well, what about a new adventure? My wife and I like adventures. We've had adventures all over the world. So we decided, let's forsake mid-city Los Angeles for rural Oregon, well water, surrounded by a forest, and feed the deer and the squirrels and the birds, maybe concentrate on writing. So I wrote my first novel, Alice Through the Multiverse, which was
cool.
Adapted from a screenplay that I had initial success with, was optioned twice for good money, but we could never get Scarlett or Kira or any of the 20-ish femmes du jour to sign on. We could never get a distributor. So it just, the options lapsed and languished. And eventually I thought, no, it's nibbling at my liver still, and I want this story told. So I will tell it in prose.
Wonderful.
So I wrote Alice Through the Multiverse, and it got a little bit of attention as a self-published novel, that it could be maybe a series, and a big company took a look at it, but they ultimately couldn't get a showrunner who would take it over that were of sufficient wattage. So it looked hopeful for a while, but I wrote a 9-page outline as to how it could go 3 seasons. But they, I don't know whether they ultimately really read my outline, but they did consider the book for some time. So I did that, and then I thought, right, I will write while I can still have a memory. I will write my memoirs not as a hooray for me book, but as a portrait of an era that is now past. And COVID was the coup de grace in a way to that that era. And it could be maybe a little bit of a sort of reference table, instruction manual to young filmmakers. Here's how I set about it in totally different circumstances to what you are now going to find yourself when you try and break into the business. But there are lessons to be learned, mistakes I made, judgments I should not have made, judgments that I should have made and worked out. So here it is, warts and all. And I hope you have a good laugh while you read it, and maybe draw some inspiration from it, because ultimately, if there's another word of advice, is persistence wins. Just if you beat your head against the wall eventually, and you keep your spirits up, and you don't become bitter and blame, and just think other people are always to blame for your lack of success. But if you keep a positive attitude and keep trying to learn and saying, okay, I struck out with that script. There must, how can I improve it, or do I have a better idea, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope it's an encouraging work to young filmmakers, even though they will find themselves in different circumstances. But now a young filmmaker is expected basically to shoot, edit, write, do everything, which of course you do. I mean, I amuse myself by shooting footage of my critters around the property. I feed the deer and I talk to the deer. They don't have much to say in return, but I have a relationship with them, which I can sense. And there are some that trust me more than others, some that come closer to me. So I do wildlife photography, wildlife videos for my own amusement. And that satisfies the urge to create images in me that I've always had from ever since I saw Hitchcock's Vertigo at age 13. So
you're feeding that beast.
I'm a beast. I'm a cinema beast, and I need to be fed with nightly streaming and daily videography.
Well, very good. Well, I think with COVID, the industry is still trying to figure out what it wants to be and how it wants to do it. So I think we kind of have to in my opinion, let the cards fall where they are. But as much as things change, the more they stay the same. And I think perseverance, having that bold hubris, can lead you down the path of success eventually. And I think your life and your autobiography really shows that. And I love that you say warts and all, because that is important. So I just wanted to thank you again for being on this show and sharing your stories.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I hate a chat, as you know.
All right. Well, you have a good one, Brian.
Okay. And you too. Thank you very much for having me.